webinar. My name is Don Higgins. I'm the owner of Crew Chief Software. Those of you who know me know that this is like the 33rd or 34th year. We're going to cover a lot of topics, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, you can change the pictures on your run, this main picture screen here, by double-clicking on a picture. I'm not going to do that now, but we covered it in a lot of other webinars. I'm going to click to start. We're going to go over some new features in Crew Chief. We're going to go over some old features, things that people may or may not know about. This is the 7.96 version, the latest version right now. There'll be another update probably after this race in South Georgia this weekend. Let's go over some of the things. Our goals are to demonstrate new features and how they help in data integrity and precision, determine weather variables and their effects on the elapsed times, experiment with factors and formulas for best results, explain different factors for gas, alcohol, E85, Q16, etc. And we're going to demonstrate how each prediction formula works, or use calculate ratios for calculating throttle stop ratios and weather variables. We're going to set up databases properly, and we're going to show you how to switch between runs the right way. We're going to use the search, compare, and verify predictions that are in there now. Those of you that have had Crew Chief for a long time know this is a very powerful tool. I use it and live by it, but there are times that it can't see things. There are variables it can't see, like track prep, engine temperatures, trans temperatures, vehicle dynamics, things like that, that you've got to know about your own car, and that requires your testing. For example, what does hot lapping do to your car? And that's why most final rounds are double breakouts. Okay, so let's start with the main run entry screen and show you some of the changes that are on here that are different. Now, the first thing I'm going to cover is some of the hidden fields that people don't realize that they're here, but this 60-foot label, for example, on the left-hand side, I put a pink little arrow on it and a circle. When you double-click that actual area that's circled, it will either turn on or turn off the split time intervals that you see to the right of it. These are split intervals. Those of you that don't have them, I'll show you how to show them. As I enter runs, I like to see the split intervals to the right, because I know I need to be around 124.6 to 8 at the 1,000 to quarter mile interval. So I'm going to double click and they'll disappear. This is probably how a lot of your screens are. Double click on 60 foot and all the split intervals will appear in that circle. The last one in that circle area is the mile per hour you gain from the 8 to the quarter mile. That's your 1,000 to quarter mile split, 8 to 1,000, the 330 to 660, 60 to 330. They're very helpful. That information is important to everybody in racing to know. The ones right below that, these guys here, this is how far off the dial your run was. So I went 889.3 on an 8900, so I was 7th thou under. To the right of that is total package. So I had a 15 light and I was 7th thou under, so I'm an 8 total package. Not that that really matters when you go under, but. And over here is your throttle stop ratio right below that. That's the throttle stop ratio that we're using. And I'm going to circle a couple other areas on the upper right. Mine says max boost, yours may not. But if you double click on the upper right, you'll see the fields will change in the upper right. So people have asked for certain things. We put them there. You can use it whatever you need, and nobody else needs to see stuff they don't care about. So you double click, there's a whole bunch of these in here. So use what you want out of there. Again, it's optional stuff. Your throttle stop ratio down here on the bottom left, if I click on it, I can change it right there. So when somebody says, no, the throttle stop ratio is wrong, where I'm bringing your attention to is I'm going to put an arrow on the bottom left where that highlighted field is. I go down, and some people have really whacked out numbers in there for whatever reason. And that comes from the fact that you have to agree with the number to the left, this throttle stop perfect number. I have a lot of customers that aren't understanding what this means. And what that is, let me erase the drawings and I'll do it again here. What this perfect number is what it would have taken to run exactly on the dial. So I had 305 in the throttle stop right above it. It would have taken 306.54 to run exactly an 8900. That's what this is tailored to. And it's based on the throttle stop ratio, which is in dark blue on there. I just put the arrow on. So if you know that this in La La Land, you can click on this. Let's say it's 0.0220, which is a 220 to 1 throttle stop ratio. Let's say I think it's 0.0237. Let's try that again, period 0237. And you'll notice that it changed the throttle stop perfect number. So as you type in your run, you'll get to throttle stop 2 and you'll press enter. We're going to try to calculate what we think would have been perfect. You have to agree with that number. That's the number one thing that we see with customers is they don't understand what this means, and therefore the program is confused. So you have to agree with that number in the blue. Every time you enter a run, you must agree with it. And you should, because if the throttle stop ratio is correct over here to the right of it, it is the right number. And I still have people that say, no, I don't believe that. But they said, no, I'm a 2 to 1 ratio, but it needed to be 306 even to be right on the number. Well, that's not a 2 to 1 ratio. So if you type over that number, 3.06, it'll pop up and say, are you sure? Because that's quite a ways different. Now, if I say yes to that, it changed the throttle stop ratio to 0.0142. That's why you got to agree with it. I say, no, I'm 220. So that's the correct number. So hopefully that answers some of the questions that people have about that field. And it's really important for crew chief. Other things that are here on the screen that we want to cover is start new run in the upper right, or excuse me, upper left. That's only used when you want to enter a run today. If you're putting old runs in, you just simply put the run date that the run was, press enter, put the run number for that day, press enter, and continue on. Start new run, when you click it, we'll put today's date in. So if I click that right now, you'll see it zero out everything and put 2/9/2022 run number 1 because it knows that's what's next. So what I get a lot of calls for is because, let me switch this back here just a minute, is people say the predictions are wrong. And then I come to find out that they didn't use start new run and they put yesterday's run date in, and it pulled yesterday's weather over when they put the run in. And of course the predictions are going to be in La La Land. So make sure you use start new run and that the date on your computer on the bottom right, you may not be able to see it, is correct. Date is very important because a lot of you have trailer weather stations that link with Crew Chief software, and we're going to pull the weather over from the day that you tell us to look it up. That's just how it works. So it's up to you to get that right, not up to me. So that helps a lot in making sure the predictions are better because we'll have the correct weather. Other things that are on the screen that I still have people don't realize is this little calendar guy on the left middle area. When you click that, it will show you every single day that has runs. So drop it down and you say, okay, I want to go to 9:29 or 9:30 or something. Well, here's all the runs on that day. And you can pull a run up by double clicking on it, and that becomes the run. That's what that's used for. And people don't also realize that you have a maintenance reminder in Crew Chief software, but we're not going to get, that's this guy here in the, I'm going to draw an arrow. That's where you put in when you need oil changes done, how many runs, stuff like that. Again, that's not going to win you the race, but it could help. All right. Most important thing here in Crew Chief, though, is some of the new data entry. I'm going to go back to the last run, switch back. For example, from reaction time all the way through mile per hour and dial-in, you don't need decimal points. So let me show you something cool here. In reaction time, that those of you that aren't sure what I'm talking about, that's this field here. You'll see that it's got a 0.015 in there, a 15 light. The new version of Crew Chief does not require all of that. You just, if it's a 15 light, just type 15 and press enter and watch what happens. It puts 0.015 in there for you. Is that cool or what? So if you're, let's say you're red, like if I was red 5, I would put a -5 in there. And see, it puts -0.005 in there. Pretty cool. It speeds up data entry, especially if you're decimally challenged. That's a new word I came up with. But I just type 15 and press enter, and it does it for me. 60 foot was 1474. I don't need a decimal. 1474. It knows right where to put it. 330 was 4307. I don't need decimals. Now look at what it says there. I'm going to actually bring this to your attention and show you. It's showing currently 43 seconds in that 330 field. You see that? So as soon as I press enter, watch what happens. It changes it to 4.307. We don't tell you and make a big deal out of it. We just fix it for you. And well, the reason I'm telling you this is because I come to many people's trailers and look at their data all the time, and I see typed information that's wrong. So right now I'm trying to fix that so I don't have prediction issues from you lousing up data entry. It's pretty simple, actually. It's a win-win for everybody. So mile per hour is the same way. So 138.88, I don't need a decimal. And this will help Crew Chief software and you, because we know that everything you type in is correct. And if it's not, we fix it for you. If it's fixable, that is. So that's a cool part that I think you guys will really like. Other thing to make sure you're doing is putting the time of day in. I just got done with a customer earlier today, and they were talking about how bad the predictions were. And then I come to the conclusion that they have never entered a time of day. So it never knew what weather to look up to fill in this run entry area. Nothing throws predictions off more than if you don't give us the right information. So time of day, this one is 9:25. You don't need colons. You just need either a space or a period in between the hour and the minutes, and then press enter. We'll look it up for you. So I hope that helps people get some of the stuff figured out. Let me go through this here. Another thing that's kind of neat here, I'm going to circle these two fields on the left hand about a third of the way down. These are here for a reason. Let me show you. If you right click on database, for example, or track, it'll do an instant search of all the runs at that track, just like that. It's pretty cool. So you can say, okay, what have I done at this track before? Or this database. I can right click on this database and boom, here's all the runs in that database. It's actually pretty neat because when you do any search screens with Crew Chief, for whatever reason, it will always give you the averages for each lane on the bottom of the screen. A lot of people don't know that. So it gives you the average for your 60 foot on both sides, reaction time on both sides, ET, etc. This one's screwed up because there's one with zeros in there because I started a run but didn't finish it. So it will show you how many runs are there on the bottom right area. It's on 15 runs. It's kind of cool. It's one of those things that you'll use from time to time because it's quite useful, actually. All right. Switching runs. I want to make sure everybody understands the correct procedure for this. On the bottom right, there's switch runs buttons. You have previous, next, last, and first. We also have, up by the run date, 2 green arrows. They do the same thing. They switch back a run or forward a run. So that is the correct way to move between runs quickly for that event. That's only if you want to go back a couple of runs, for example. So it really comes in handy, and I think it's a wonderful way to move back and forth rapidly between runs. And since a lot of people don't even know it's there, I thought I'd bring it up. Okay, and the next 2 things before we move on to databases, and these are important ones, is this field called traction meter. Okay, that is a 0 to 100 how you feel the traction was. And a good rule of thumb is when the traction's not very good, I don't like to predict with a run in the 70s. 88 on this particular case at St. Louis meant the track was very, very good. I had no problems at all with the track. But if I go down there and I run an 893 on an 890 index and I'm driving the car all over the place, I'll put a traction meter number of about 75. And that means the next prediction I make, if the track comes around, is probably going to be off 3 or 4 hundredths. So give yourself some additional notes about how you felt the track was by giving a number. 88 is spectacular. You know, Orlando Raceway Park, when the Pro Mods are there, is a 99. That'll take your shoes off. Anything in the mid 80s on higher is an exceptionally good track. Anything in the 70s means watch out, because the next prediction, unless the track stays the same, is probably in La La Land. And the next field I want to bring to your attention is the light meter. This right here is a drop-down list, and it shows how light it was outside. Again, I brought this out last year, but a lot of people don't know it's there. So bright, twilight, overcast, or dark. Those are your options right now. Again, that will help, especially in reaction time and dial and all that. Okay, and then what I want to cover is databases, and then we're going to cover the logbook, and then we'll get into predictions, but I got to cover this stuff. So what I'm talking about now is on the top of the screen, we have a databases menu. I'm just circled it. That's where you set up, add, or modify any databases that exist. Okay, there's nothing wrong with having a lot of databases. However, there is something wrong with not naming them properly. So, for example, when I first started this, you'll see a lot of these say Supercomp Bowling Green, for example. Well, that's all well and good, but now I go by year. So the ones I've been entering lately have always had a year in front of the name to remind me what it is, where I was, what year, what I was doing. You know, like 615 motor, 15 number 1 throttle stop. That's what that means. Late in the year, you know, Vegas 905, 001 throttle stop. You know, that kind of stuff helps me later on, because before I was just naming them based on the track, which is fine, but how old is this? You know, and is it still useful database? Now, if you don't have a particular engine anymore and you want to delete some runs, if you highlight a database like I just did and then click this delete button down here, be careful, it will delete all the runs and that database attached to it. So if you want to wipe out a whole bunch of runs real fast, do that, but always make sure you have a new database and runs entered into that new database before you blank out an entire program. Now, I would highly recommend you back up your files first. Too many people do this and then they realize they made a mistake, and there's not much I can do for you unless you back up. So let's get to the databases. So now when I make a database, I want to make sure that what I'm doing means something. So this is my database last year that I was using virtually quite a bit of the year, except for at Earlville, there was a different database. But the weight, the launch RPMs, all that, tire pressures, rollout if you know it, front tire pressure, delay box that you normally use. The tree type's normally going to be 000. And then on here, there's also the date created. So right there, 9/1/21 is when I created that database. Okay, since this is a throttle stop program, make sure when you create a database and you're using throttle stops that you click throttle stop used here. There's also setup info page 2 that we're going to cover in a minute, but you can't forget that. So let me get this, or I drop this down and pick Super Gas, Super Comp, and I'll save it. So whenever you make a change, make sure you save it. The next thing is going to Setup Info page 2. Once you're done with this first one, go to Setup Info page 2. Let me erase the drawings here. And this also asks about throttle stops, but it allows throttle stop number 1 timer. And those of you with mechanical stops, we'll cover that in a little bit, but your number 1 timer, if it's an electronic throttle stop, will be listed there, and you give us a starting ratio. Like this is 0.0220. That's 220 to 1, how most people say. My ratio is 220 to 1. Well, actually, it's 0.022. That's the correct way it's actually done, because you're not changing seconds at a time. You're changing hundredths of a second at a time. Fuel type, make sure you have the correct fuel type in there. The rest of this is all, optional. Those of you that run old school mechanical stops, that's this area. That's if you have a bolt under the throttle stop or under your pedal. A plate system is here if you have like an easy plate or whatever they're called now. Or if you use ballast, like for junior dragsters, you use ballast a lot. Make sure that's checked. But when any of these are checked, you got to make sure throttle stop used is also checked up in the upper left. Other thing is the vehicle type. You've got to have a vehicle in here. I have separate ones for 1/8 mile and 1/4 mile. So in this case, I'll pick dragster no wing. Right below that is our time slip simulator. If you get that option, which I'll show you later, what kind of car do you have? It's got dragster, it's got 68 Camaro, or junior dragster in that list. Then the final thing I want to cover, which is kind of important, we calculate horsepower on the run entry screen. In the bottom right, this is a factor that controls that. It's a calculation that's been around forever and ever and ever, but I just refined it because this is a factor for throttle stops. And it tells you if you're ET racer, it should be 234. Throttle stop, 213, 214, somewhere in that area. If you're going 1/8 mile ET, that's the number it should be. If you're a throttle stop on 1/8 mile, that's the number it should be. That's what it lists. And for junior dragsters, around 160. I'll show you later what that means to the program. And again, don't forget to save it. Any changes you make, save them. So the other thing that happens with this is that I see people put multiples in here. So let me show you the correct way to do this. I'm going to delete the database that I created. and I'm going to show you how we create a new one. So I've got a perfectly good database here that I've always been pretty happy with this setup. I want to make a new database, and I want to use all the prediction logic that's already built into this and copy it to the new database. So a simple way to do that is following these steps. This is really important that you understand the correct way. So first, on the left-hand side, I'm going to draw your attention to a blinking label that says double-click to select a database. This is so important that we want to make damn sure that you pick the right one that you're about to make a copy of. So I'm going to double-click on this and then press the Enter key. And when you do that, it will turn this field in the upper middle red. And that means it's ready for data input. So we're about to either modify this database, whatever we need to fix, and then save it, or we're going to make a duplicate of it with a new name. So I'm going to erase the drawings and bring your attention to Start New Database. After you double-click over here, press the Enter key, and the correct name is where these arrows are. Then and only then will you click the Start New Database. And when you do, you'll notice the database name changes to 2 stars. And you can't do anything else until you put a name in. So I'm going to call it 2022. And I'm going to go 0.0125 timer Gainesville. Because I'm going to go there. I press the Enter key. And then I immediately save this. And the reason I do this, down the bottom, very important, the next step must be after you press Enter is to click Save. And let me show you why. First off, when I do that, I make damn sure that I didn't just change the name of an existing database, which people do all the time. So I go back and I look and I say, okay, I have my 2021 database here, and I also have a 2022 for Gainesville. Perfect. So this is the one I want. Now I can press Enter on that, or double click on that, press Enter, and make any changes I wish. But now this database already has all the prediction logic, factors, formulas that was used in the other database that I had created. And so when I start entering runs into it, I know immediately it's going to be accurate. The first run may be in La La Land based on whatever the track gives me, but after that, it ought to follow exactly what my prediction logic has been. And when you create a database, it gives you the date down here in the middle. So if you put 2 in with the same name, which is kind of hard to do, look for the oldest one and you'll know which one to keep. The oldest one should be the one you want to keep. So we've got a database in there that we want. And now I'm just going to exit in the bottom right of that. Everything in Crew Chief exits on the bottom right. You notice that arrow on the bottom right? That's where you exit. You don't exit on the upper right. You always exit on the bottom right. And there's a reason for that. Okay, so let's erase the drawings. So we have the correct database that we created. So when we start entering runs, when I start racing tomorrow at South Georgia, which is very similar in barometric pressure and to Gainesville, I know that I can throw those runs in there, and Gainesville and South Georgia are going to use basically the same setup. Orlando may even use the same one. So we've got the database set up. And now what I want to cover is the logbook. Before we get into predictions, I want to show you how you know you've got good runs. And where's the logbook? Well, there's 2 ways it works. This bottom here is the event logbook button. Control L on your keyboard will also fire that. And then in the top middle of your screen, there's a log view menu. And the reason for that is that log view menu has other options. If I drop it down, I can pick runs that aren't from this weekend and combine them into runs from this weekend, for example. If I really want to compare if I think maybe something's not right with the car, I can pull up old logbook and attach a new run into it and say, okay, well, my split intervals are all screwed up. So there's other things here that most people aren't going to use. It doesn't really matter. But I want to get into the logbook because it's that important. The logbook will answer questions for us. So when somebody says, hey, the predictions missed it, whatever, first thing I do is go to their logbook. And here's all the runs side by side. And let me make sure you understand a few things. First and most importantly, there's that light meter thing. And I'm going to circle in the middle between runs. For example, I'm going to do a few of these. See, the light meter means bright. There's a brightness. Here's a twilight or dark. It's twilight right there, and then back to bright. So when I see a twilight or dark, I know that maybe my reaction time's not going to be exactly right because, I used to be really good at night, but now I can take delay box out because I don't hit the tree as well as I think I'm going to. But between the columns is the differences. So I'm going to circle or put lines under these. On the left-hand side, between the first run and the second, I'm just drawing lines under that. Okay, these are the differences. So my reaction time was 2 thou slower, or 2 thou quicker, that's a minus. My 60 foot was 6 thou quicker, which usually happens between the first and second run. I was 1 thou quicker at the 330, 3 thou quicker at the 8th, 6 thou at the 1,000, and 8 thou at the quarter mile. The difference in throttle stop was 4 little numbers. The difference in optimal, or what would have been perfect, was 2.2 numbers. There's the difference in DA, difference in relative humidity, difference in horsepower, difference in grains of water. And then down the bottom is the 60 to 330, 330 to 8th, 8 to 1,000, 1,000 a quarter, and 660 to quarter, and the differences. So what is important on this screen is to make sense of the numbers. So for example, there's always a staging problem. And this, you're always going to have something that's kind of weird, at least I do. And let me get rid of these drawings. So for example, I was good. I remember this. This is St. Louis. I was 007 red, then 009 red, because I didn't believe the 007 was accurate. I added some for it, but the track was that good. So the next one, though, I missed the tree. A guy rolled the beams, and I was 60 on the tree. Then I picked up 46 the next run. What I'm looking for, however, is what we call the inverse effect of 60 foot in reaction time. So for example, I was 69 slower and 5 thou slower in 60 foot. That's okay as long as there's not one negative and one positive. What this tells me is when I stage differently. So for example, if I go in real shallow, right here is a good example of it. I was 17 thou slower reaction time and 3 thou quicker 60 foot, which usually is the sign that I went in shallow. I didn't have the greatest reaction time, and my 60 foot was quicker. Usually it'll be a 1-to-1 relationship, like it is the next one. So the next one, I'm 14 quicker reaction time and 200ths slower 60 foot. So that's usually a sign I went in deep. And what that means is that your predictions are probably right, but you screwed it up by your staging. And here's a perfect example. In the middle of the screen there, I'm going to draw an arrow to, and this is what happens. I went 90 with a 5, dead on 5. The next one, I obviously staged wrong. And my reaction time was better, but my 60 foot was slow, and I was slow all the way down by 200ths, which happens to be about the difference in how I staged. So there was nothing wrong with the predictions. It was how I staged the car that screwed that run up. And so when you see this, I call it pogo sticking, where you're going to go fast, slow, that signals a problem with staging. So before you start blaming anything on the car or the program or anything else, make sure that you understand your logbook. because if you call us, that's the first place I'm going to tell you to go. So that particular week, I was dialed really well, about exactly where I really wanted to be. And all of this shows that. I came out of the gate 90 with a 4, 89.6, 90 with a 7, 88.4, trying to hold a little bit. Then I went 90 with a 5, staged wrong, went 92, went back to 89.7, 89.4, 88.7, trying to hold a little, and 89.3, thinking I'm actually pretty honest. So that's how I want to look at it. I want to see here two things in your logbook. Double O's down in your split intervals on the bottom of the screen, I'm going to circle. Those ought to be all double O something. And when they're not, that tells me there's an issue. Like, here's one that's a 100th difference. 8 thou difference, 7 thou. Those are right on the edge of being terrible. And it was, because that run is the one I staged wrong. So as long as you're seeing double O's in your logbook on the split intervals down the bottom, and the ETs are fairly close, the program must be working properly. But if you're not seeing double O's in your split intervals, and you're not seeing exact, like what I'm talking about, where your reaction time and 60 foot don't invert on each other, then that will help crew chief software immensely figure out the predictions for you. Okay, this is very important to understand that. I can solve most people's problems just by looking at the logbook. Okay, other things that are up here. A lot of people didn't realize this, but the see it buttons right above. Okay, if I want to see a run on the logbook that's not on the screen right now, all I do is click see it above it. Now, some of these are in red. Whenever they're in red, that means I hit the brakes. Okay, that's a run completed run, which means I hit the brakes and I let crew chief figure out what it should have been on. That will turn the see it buttons red for every one of those. Okay, that's cool information, but here is a really cool thing. On the upper left of the logbook are two buttons here, Stats and CW. Okay, Stats will go through first. You click on that orange button up there and watch what happens. Stats calculates the averages for both lanes. Very cool thing that we do, because at least I think it is. And it tells you 3 runs on the left, 7 in the right. Okay? Of those, average reaction time in the left is 004, average in the right is 24. Average ET, 889.8, 889.9. That's great. Looks cool. But on the bottom of that screen, there is some 2 little dots here, normal and trimmed. And what the trimmed means is we're going to take the high and the low out of each one of those lanes and give you a more true average. At least I consider it to be. So I click on trimmed, and the right lane now will take 2 out of it. The left really couldn't change a whole lot because there was only 3 runs, but it changed. The average reaction time is now a negative 007, and here I'm still 24 on the right, and I'm 889.7 in the right, 889.7 average in the left. And my average throttle stop is in here, average density altitudes, wind speed, wind direction, all that. So it's kind of cool information. And you can tell right away if you have a lane problem when you look at enough runs and then trim them. If the changes are minimal, then you know you're got a good car and you're set up properly. Now all you got to do is drive it. I want to show you that. And then the next one on the upper left is CW, which is current weather. And that brings up a screen that you can drag around that used to be really important to me. And it gives you all the current weather from the weather station that you can compare with what's on your screen in your logbook to see what run you want to use as a baseline. This used to be really important, but it's been changed now because of things I've done on the prediction screen that kind of make that not as as necessary as it used to be. So that's a cool thing this logbook does. And you can print it if you want. It will print. It's trying to print now. If you have a printer hooked up, it'll print a really cool logbook. So we'll go back. You can exit out of the logbook with the escape key on your keyboard, or the upper left has an escape also. Okay, so let's get to a couple other areas here, and then we'll get into nothing but predictions. I'm going to cover something I consider to be pretty important, and that is, let's go to one of these that's interesting. Let's see here. This one. I want to make sure that everybody's using Crew Chief to the fullest extent. See this opponent information area? A lot of people aren't using this. You need to use opponent information. There's two reasons for it. One is it records your opponents so you can search them. I can search by their competition number or their name or any part of their name when I do this. And it tells me all their ETs. Again, I don't need decimals for any of that. And it tells me how many feet and inches apart I was at every interval. Very important information. And then over here, it tells me how close I was. And the reason I'm going to bring this up, because there were two runs I made at St. Louis that were quite interesting, both against Mr. Gary Stinnett, who I consider one of the premier engine builders and a hell of a race car driver. And it was fascinating because the finish line margin was 007 on both races against him, which is 2.5 feet that I took both times against Gary. And it was fascinating. But it also there's an option in Crew Chief called Time Slip Simulator. It's about the best $80 you'll spend a year. And what it does is it helps you drive. It's a video game, basically, that we control. And I want to cover it real quick before we get in too much. Let me erase the drawings. I'm going to play it for you because I love this thing. So what it does, it's a video game that Crew Chief controls. And it fills in all the ETs for it, and then we just click on the bottom right where it says Simulate. And now let me turn the sound off. But it's got two dragsters or whatever kind of cars you have. And you can switch modes. I can look at him or he can look at me. I can turn the finish line on or off, track position, and I can watch the opponent all the way. It's like here, I'll click play. He's watching me. This is from Gary's point of view. And this is how the race looked to him. And that's the finish line. Now I can also go like above. So I hit play, and this is like from the Goodyear blimp. And it's telling me how many feet and inches I am apart at every split second. And you'll see how it looks from above. That's how close the race was. So the next one I'm going to do is the ESPN camera view, I call it. This is how it looks from the multiple angles. He's behind me because he's a lot faster car, and that's how it looked. I can turn the finish line off, and it will just go. You know, it won't stop in the middle of or right at the finish line. But this is cool information, especially for junior dragsters. We do a lot with them, and it's great information. It really is. But what's neat about it is that you can change it. You can turn it to super slow motion, and you can also play it before you race somebody. If you enter the opponents, there's something called Finish Line Manager. And that's up here, which will play the video game of how the race should look before you ever run somebody. And that is very important information, I think. So if I had to run Gary again, I would click on Finish Line Manager with his run on the screen and play the video right here on the right-hand side where it says Time Slip Simulator. That option is available if you want, but this will tell you how many feet apart to expect him at every interval before you ever run him. And you can drop the list down on the upper left here, pick different opponents, or if you don't know, if you haven't run the guy, you can pull somebody up by mile per hour who's similar. And it's really great information. Okay, so I just wanted to cover that. And then one last thing is run completion. So if I'm on the brakes, the run completion screen is critically important. That's this one, this run completion tab right here. What it does is it compares your current ETs with the previous run ETs and comes up with a run completion of what your car should have run if you hadn't lifted. You only use this if you lift or were on the brakes. And then on the bottom right area is the formulas that control it. Now, we have 3 or 4 different formulas for quarter mile. I recommend using the 1,000-foot momentum one because the 1,000-foot is a good indicator if you're quarter mile racing, but that's not the only indicator. So the momentum one looks at more than just the 1,000-foot. Very important that you do run completion on any run that you hit the brakes. With the new version, though, we also add this button. It says choose different runs. So let's say the run previous to that you staged wrong, and you know you did. So you can drop this list down by clicking choose different runs and pick a run that was a better run and double click on it, and it'll run complete off of that run rather than the last run. Very important that you get this right. Or you can simply click on the, hold on a minute, erase the drawings. You can click on the ET and type over it if you want. It's up to you. But run completion is very important that you utilize that. So let's go from here. I'm going to go to the predict screen. Now we've covered that, but all right. This was a good run. The next run was also against Gary. I went 889.6 to his 889.4. So again, it was 7th thou at the stripe, the exact same margin of victory on the time slip, both of them. It was kind of cool, actually. All right, so what we're going to do is go into predict throttle stop now, and I'm going to show you guys something really cool about on the predict screen. So predict throttle stop is where we're at right now. And I'm going to get the pen out and show you a couple of things. First off, with the weather stations, you got to make damn sure that the weather counter is counting. So that's on the bottom left is this little number that changes every 15 seconds. It should take another reading and update its count. So if it's not, and the predictions are wrong, well, we have our answer why. Because if the weather's not coming over, then the weather's not correct when you put it into crew chief, and then the next prediction is going to be in La La Land as usual. So make sure that that weather counter is counting every 15 seconds. It should, and it is counting for me. It just went to 55. So that's a really important area. The other areas we're going to start with is the 60-foot predictor in the middle of the screen. I'm going to draw an arrow to that. That is something that many people haven't really used properly. So what this is a 60-foot ET predictor. I drop it down, and usually I'll pick density adjusted 60-foot, and it'll automatically move the 60-foot up and down based on the weather. So if I change the temperature to 88 degrees, you see the 60-foot automatically went from 146 to 148. In a few seconds, it's going to take another weather reading and put the correct weather from the weather station I'm testing in the temperature field, and it's going to change my density adjusted 60-foot back to 146 something. But it's important that you use something, either type over your estimated 60-foot or use something else. So it just changed. So I can go track temperature adjusted 60-foot, those of you that take track temperature readings. Vapor pressure adjusted, humidity. When I go out to Las Vegas, I use barometer adjusted 60-foot all the time because you can have a 4/10 barometer change at Las Vegas, and I've never seen that anywhere else. Horsepower factor adjusted 60 is a good one. Throttle stop adjusted 60 foot is for those guys that have the throttle stop comes back to full throttle in the 60 foot area. And that means your 60 foot is going to be moving with your throttle stop. DA barrel and relative humidity adjusted 60 foot is another good one, but maybe overcompensates. And then when there's times I just can't make a decision, I'll click the average 60 foot. That's the last one in the list, and it will automatically put the average 60 foot in my current 60 foot area. Let me erase the drawings and show you what I'm talking about here. So it just changed my estimated 60 foot to 147.21, which is the average for all the runs in that database. And that's for if you just can't make a decision on what you think the 60 foot's going to be, you can go over the average. Now, in situations like this, I probably wouldn't do that because the weather changes are pretty drastic. And I think it would be a 146 or high 145 60 foot. So it automatically moves the 60 foot when I pick one of these. Don't forget, because whenever it's different than the baseline run, it will turn these fields yellow, okay? Whenever you see yellow, that means we caution you, just like a yellow sign on the highway. That means, hey, take a look, caution, whatever. Are you meaning to do this? In this case, yes, I am, but just verify it. That's what those colors mean. And the same thing applies to these two. You see, these are bright green in weather station DA, ET change, and the barometer. We call it the double whammy effect, where the barometer is a lot better and the DA is a lot better. We turn that bright green, and that means you may get into your jetting and the car may take off faster than even our predictions are saying. We're all jetted just a little bit fat. So when the air conditions get to, in this case, it's 780 feet of density altitude right now here in Florida, that means that your jetting may just be perfect and the car could absolutely take off and fly. So that's something you got to kind of know about your car, because crew chief can't really do that for you. So that's a little understanding of 60 foot and the colors. I use density adjusted 60 foot after my first pass every single time. It's just the way it is, and it's usually extremely accurate. There's factors that control it. We'll get into that in a minute. Okay, so the other thing on here is on the bottom left, we have the ability to switch runs that you're predicting with. You can switch to previous run right here or switch to next if you went back too far. And I do that a lot to switch between runs from that same weekend. Usually on a morning run, I'll predict off of yesterday morning's first run. Afternoon, I'll predict off the first run or yesterday's second run. But I'll switch it around and I'll say, okay, the prediction is X. Why is it X? Because of this. Usually I'll pick the same time of the day because the track prep will be similar. So that's where you can switch runs and immediately see the effects of your predictions. So if I switch back a run or I switch forward a couple, it changes the predictions. And what I'm looking for is some stability. There's always going to be a run that doesn't make sense. And so you got to know that. You know, I'm looking for a stable number. So I'm going to go back. This 890 with a 4. Next, I'm going to go back to 889.6. So before I start doing much with the predictions, I always like to cover a couple of things that are really important. I unload the car, I put the weather station up at a race. And then the first thing I do is I'm like, well, what do you think I should predict? I want to bring your attention, let me erase this and bring your attention to some really important tools in Crew Chief. Okay, this column that says current, those of you that have been in webinars before know this, but anything in any of these fields can be right-clicked on to do an instant search. I'm going to pause and show you again. So for example, I get there and my first inclination is, okay, it's 700 and some odd feet of DA. I'm going to right-click on that and it will show me all the runs around plus or minus that value. So I right-click on it, boom. it found 34 runs. Let me show you how I know that, because on the bottom right, it says found 34 runs. Okay. And again, if you remember, here's the average for both lanes, all down here. Great. Wonderful. But I want to bring your attention, I'm going to erase these drawings and bring your attention to this little checkbox in the bottom right that says show current database only. Because there's a lot of runs here that aren't, there are some of them are 8th mile bracket races, which we don't care about. So I'm going to click this show current database only, and it got rid of, or it should have, it either found them or it didn't. If it doesn't change the count, that means it didn't find any from the current database that matched. And that's important, because when it can't find any runs under similar atmospheric conditions, or at least DA, I'm a little concerned. That means I'm in uncharted territory. So the next thing I do if I can't find that, is I'll go to this button and I'll combine weather. When you right click on the current, you only get one value to search off of. But if I go to Las Vegas, for example, I want to see multiple values, where I'm going to do a search on not only density altitude, but I want to add barometer to it. So this is a pick list. Everything in Crew Chief kind of looks similar, where I can pick whatever weather variable I want to include in the search, and then it'll immediately tell me how many runs it found under similar conditions. It has found none. 0 there. So I can uncheck. Now I really know I'm in uncharted territory because I've got 2,000 runs in Crew Chief. So I'm going to uncheck barometer. And now under density altitude, it found 5 similar runs. That's what it says in the middle of that screen. And this is important because if it finds some runs, I will click this display runs button right here. And the first thing, the reason it's only finding 5 is because I put the beginning date from 2020. It automatically goes back, I don't know, a year or 2 years, and it won't go any farther unless you click on the beginning date field and change it. But when I click on show run or display runs, it will show all the runs that are somewhat similar. And I've got some here that are from 2020 to 2021. They're not exact enough, but they're close on density altitude. And they'll give me some kind of a starting number if I haven't made horrendous changes to the car, and I have. So really only one run there has any kind of correlation to me. And that I went 895, but I had a really slow 60 foot, which tells me it's the old database setup. So I'm kind of in uncharted territory because I'm going to be about 146 on 60 foot right now. So I'm just going to change it, override that estimated 60 foot to a 146. And you'll notice in the middle of the screen it says your estimated 60 foot, no longer says density adjusted 60 foot, because it's going to use whatever I typed in. So I'm no longer a 153, I'm in the 146, 147 range. So I'm not finding any old data that will help me. So I'm going to have to make a run and hope for the best for my first pass. That's what that means. The search capability in Crew Chief is important for you to know. Like if you're on alcohol and you can right click on grains. Let's see how many runs are number 40 in grains. 25. I found 25 runs with similar grains. Any with that database? No. Again, so I'm on my own on that. But I can right click on temperature, whatever I want to pick. Usually it's DA or AA, these numbers here, and it will show me how many runs. It's a really cool feature and will help you immensely. When you get done with a prediction, I always right click on something or use the search weather button and just trust but verify. I always say that. So let's cover the rest of the things that are on the predict screen here before we get in too much more. So the columns are base run. Whatever run was on the run entry screen, or what if you use the switch to previous run here, or switch to next here, whatever run you've selected. Current is, of course, whatever's coming from your weather station. I'm going to assume most of you have a trailer-based weather station that automatically pulls in. The difference column is very important because it will do the simple math between the current and the base run. It's 15.9 degrees cooler, 9.4% higher humidity, barometer's better by 0.47, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm 1,600 feet better DA than the run that's on the screen. 930 better AA. The horsepower correction's better, the grains of water, the vapor pressure's better. All these numbers are listed right here. Very important that you understand what all this means. And then the ET change column. That's what we're going to spend some time on before we get really into what all the factors mean. So the ET change column is the last column. And when somebody calls me and says, the predictions are weird, I always tell them, go to the ET change column. So get used to seeing this, because it'll tell you why it's changing its predictions with whatever numbers are in here. Okay, so anything that has numbers is correlated to what? It's correlated to the formula you've chosen. On the bottom right, I'm going to put a big arrow here, is called choose formula. DA barrel and humidity, or DA half barrel half humidity, is, I'm just going to drop this list down. You'll see what we call pre-canned formulas that are pre-designed that usually work fairly well. So my gold standard is the DA half barrel half humidity that's highlighted in yellow right now in that list. That's where you'll find Don Higgins usually. That formula covers the bottom two answers, which is vapor pressure and your chosen formula. Your chosen formula equals your chosen formula down here, okay? So the ET change column, when you pick a formula out of that list, watch what happens to that ET change column in the middle of the screen. I'm going to go to temp barrel and relative humidity, second option down. Now the ET change column has numbers in the temperature, the humidity, and the barometer, but nothing in density altitude, because all you chose was temp, barrel, and relative humidity. That formula works really well for stockers. I don't use it a lot in throttle stop racing, but some people do, and it can be very accurate if it's set up properly. In this particular case, it actually would be really, really close. But if I drop that list down and I go to density altitude, third one down, notice the ET change column has nothing in temperature, nothing in humidity, nothing in barometer, but it has almost 900ths in the weather station density altitude. Because that's what we're doing. That's what you told it you wanted to use. That's what happened. If I go density altitude barometer, I get DA difference and barometer difference. So if you say, well, I've got horsepower correction, which is 3 from the bottom, chosen, but nothing's in density altitude, that's because you picked horsepower correction. And when you pick horsepower correction, nothing is there except for the 0.08 that I'm just drawing a line to right now, about 3/4 of the way down the screen. So I can erase the drawings because it's getting kind of cluttered. So I picked horsepower correction. I'm going to circle that, and it goes to choose formula of HP correction factor right there. Those two are working in conjunction, and therefore they are controlling the answer for that. So that ET change column, very important. So when you're looking at your numbers, have a good idea of what each one of these does. Now, I'm a big proponent in DA half barrel half humidity, horsepower correction, maybe DA by itself, and the temp barrel and relative humidity. So many years ago, a customer called me and said, you know, the DA half barrel, half humidity is a little too slow, and the horsepower corrections are a little too fast. And it would be nice if we could add them because on average, they're really close. And I'm like, well, that's a hell of an idea. So if you drop that list down, let me erase the drawings and bring it to your attention here. Drop this choose formula list down. I guess I should probably put an arrow here. Let's show you what can happen here. I can go down to the very bottom. It says average several formulas. So I drop this list down. Again, the crew chief always has similar screens here to pick whatever it is that's important to you. So I'm going to average formulas by checking them. Now, don't check all of them. The HP correction, the DA, half barrel, half humidity, and let's temp barometer and relative humidity, and then click done on the bottom. Now, the bottom two formulas are now averaged for 3 formulas. These two here are now averaged for 3 different answers. And look how close they are to crew chief number 1 now. It's pretty amazing how that works. But averaging several formulas, if you get one that's a little bit too slow, one that's a little too fast, combined, they're perfect. You know, I couldn't believe it. But there's times when I'll average those 3, and if I can hit the tree, I'm going to be all over that ET. If I can hit the tree. So that's one thing. I wanted to show you how that effect is. Before we get into changing anything, I wanted to show you what each one of these means. And it's very important you understand this. So we haven't got into crew chief number 1, which is what we're going to cover now. Crew chief number 1 here. Okay. Crew chief number 1 is a separate formula than whatever you've chosen here, and it has no effect on whatever you choose down the bottom. So what is crew chief number 1? Well, a quick cool thing to do is the actual word that says crew chief number 1 up here. Let me just draw an arrow to it. And I'm going to change the pen color here just a minute, because that orange is killing. I'm going to change it to black here. So here is what we call a label. This says crew chief number 1 right there. It's circled. I'm going to draw an arrow from it from the top down just to show you where I am. If you double click the word crew chief number 1 that's circled right now, a box pops up and says, okay, you want to know how the formula arrived at its decision. Here's how it did it. The base run was an 889.6. The barometer adjustment was 0.0157 quicker. The density altitude we believe would be worth minus 0.0847. The 60-foot adjustment is minus 0.0079. Then, therefore, the ET is going to run, if I leave it alone, 888.7878. Excuse me. The values are at this instant only, it tells you on the bottom of the screen. But that is, at that instant, how it arrived at its answer. So it's got to slow down about 12 hundredths, 11.2 hundredths. Okay, so that's how it arrived at the ET, that if you leave it alone at whatever it is, this is what it's going to run. It's kind of cool to see how it arrives at its answers. Let me erase the drawings here. So it's going to run an 878.75 based on right there in the top middle of the screen. And what does this mean? This throws a lot of people off. Let me draw a line around this. This column here, I'm going to draw an arrow right to what it says. If the throttle stop stays at 3.16 seconds, which is on the bottom left of the screen, is my baseline throttle stop. If it stays at that, these are the ET predictions, okay? Some people say, well, if I put 340 in it, it's going to run 878. That's not what it means. This is ET predictions in this column with the arrows. Okay? If you leave it alone at 316, it's going to run that number. If you want to go 8900, that's what this column is. It says you need to put these numbers in to go 8900. Okay? These are ET predictions on that column. These are throttle stop predictions to go 8900 in this column. Really important that you understand that. This bottom number is your throttle stop ratio that Crew Chief software is using. And we'll verify that in a minute, but I want to show you that. I just want everybody to understand what this means. So if you leave it alone, it's going to go 878.7 or almost 879. This says the vapor pressure says it's going to go 880. This says it's going to go 880 if you leave it alone. So you know you have to slow it down because 880 is not going to do you any good on an 890 race. So I need 22 numbers at least to run the number. So we've covered that. So Crew Chief number 1, though, in order to change it, you just click right where my arrow is, right, or my circle is. This guy with a little star next to it. See that? Boy, am I an artist. You just simply click on that right where the star is, or any of those numbers, anywhere in that area that I've circled, and Crew Chief software will pop up a very familiar choose list here. Okay, let me show you what this means. So here you check whatever weather variable you want, and of course not all of them. Can't believe I have to tell people this all the time, but don't choose all of them. 2, maybe 3 at the most. And then over here you assign the variables that control it. This is for the Jeg Coughlins and Peter Biondos of the world, how it first started. They wanted a double checking tool. They do things by hand. Great. And they wanted that same capability in Crew Chief, so they wouldn't have to spend 5 minutes coming up with their answer they do by hand. So they wanted a certain thing in there, so I put it in. And if you go to some classes, I know there's some really good racers that put on seminars, and they say, we'll use this formula, and this formula. Well, you can make whatever they tell you real quick in Crew Chief by checking whatever they tell you to do. A popular one is density, altitude, vapor pressure, and barometer, for example. I've heard that from many customers. So I have them check those 3 things and put the values that the class told them to put in each one of these over on the right that I'm putting arrows on. Okay. So when they do that, they get exactly what the school that they went to tells them to use to start with. And they find out that perhaps it's not all that accurate. Some of them are, great. But if not, you have other options here. And all I do in my life is work on prediction formulas. It's kind of weird, I know, and I've come up with my own. And one of them that I really like is this vapor HP correction down here. You're welcome to use that. And I combine it with barometer if I'm at the same event. You know, a lot of times if I go from Illinois to Florida, I won't use the barometer in there because it's already part of this vapor HP correction a little bit. But vapor HP correction is a horsepower correction factor that has water content also built into it. And that's an important one. It doesn't work for everybody, even though I can't imagine why it wouldn't. And then the factor that I use for it is 0.0054, and to the right is a little number 0.005. You're welcome to use those. And I use 0.30 on barometer. And it's usually pretty good. So you can review this video tomorrow or whenever it comes available and go over and look at this real carefully if you want. I'm not hiding anything from anybody. I just do this to make sure that people are well versed in Crew Chief software. So I'm going to erase the drawings so you can choose it. And then you just click on Save and Return. And it will update its predictions based on what you've chosen. So we already have this checked. And if you try all this stuff and you get confused and you're scared of it, you can just click this Use AA Default Formula in the bottom middle, and it will go back to the factory default, which will work for a lot of people as well. So in this case, we already know that the vapor HP and the barometers come up with 341 on the timer, which looks to me to be pretty close. However, if I were to check density, altitude, vapor pressure, and barometer, like some of these classes, and click Save, it's telling me 335. That's a pretty big swing. It's kind of cool. So now I'm going to double click where Crew Chief number 1, that label I was talking about before, but I'm going to circle it again. I'm going to double click right there and see how it arrived at its answer. Double click. It says, okay, the barometer is worth 0.0157, the density altitude is 0.0568, and the vapor pressure is 0.0003. Okay, that's how it came to its answer. Great, wonderful. I don't think it's right, but I just want to let you know what is out there. So I go there, and I'm going to go back, and I'm going to choose a different way. I'm going to go down here to something called Optimal TS Ratio. And I'm going to leave that only by itself. I am going to check this bottom guy right here and nothing else. And that factor controls is down here. Let's just see what happens when we select it. This is another formula that Don Higgins created, the great and wonderful Don Higgins. And when I click Save and Return, it's in where it's a little too aggressive. Again, that one I use after I made my first pass, and the rest of the weekend it's fine, but I can't go from a barometer of 47 numbers difference. It doesn't usually work that great. I just want to show you some of the options are here that are available. So when you select things, you can immediately see the results. So I'm going to go back to my Vapor HP and uncheck Optimal, and I'm just going to use Vapor HP and see what it says. It says 337. Again, the barometer is probably worth something. So I'm going to check barometer, save it, and it goes back up to about what I expect it to be. It's interesting. Kind of cool, actually. You can tinker with it. So let me just double check everything here. So let's say we just got done from a run. And I want to make sure everybody's paying attention now, because this is really a cool thing that I'm going to cover. I just got back from a run, and I went 889.6. Okay? So here's that run, 889.6. And I'm like, wow, I didn't miss it much, only 4 thou. Okay, it's not a bad run. But I want to make it even better. So the cool thing in Crew Chief in the new version, I'm going to draw an arrow on the upper middle pointing to base run. Okay? I want you to try this. You'll right-click on the word base run. Let me erase the drawings and do this in a different color. Pink. So I'm going to say this again. I'm going to right-click where that pink circle is, right where it says base run. I am going to right-click with my mouse. And this is a prediction double check. When I right-click with my mouse on base run, everything in the base run moves to the current. See, all of the current now has what the base run has. Now stick with me for a minute and I'll walk you through this. Why is it doing this? Because I want to act like this 889.6 run hasn't been made. So what I just did is I right-clicked on base run. It transferred all the weather over, and in the bottom middle, it turned the weather off so the weather station can't interrupt what I'm trying to do. It will no longer let the weather station take readings every 15 seconds. Okay, you're still lost, I understand. But it just took this run out of the database temporarily, so we can act like it hasn't been run. And how do we do that? Well, we come down to switch previous run now. On the files that I have sent in part of this webinar, you'll probably see them on the bottom of your screen or bottom right or right-hand side. There'll be 3 files, and they're screenshots of exactly what I'm doing with step-by-step of what happens here. So I right-clicked on base run, and now I'm going to use the switch to previous run on the bottom left to go back to the run I had on the screen before this 889.6 pass was created. And I'm going to switch back to a previous run, and I want the prediction answers over here to say about 317, okay? All of these where the arrows are on the right-hand side should stay at 317 when I switch previous run. Because my previous run was an 890 with a 4. Okay? So what's different here? It's not coming up with the right answer. Why not? Well, let's see what's different. Okay, so the difference column here has some information in it. It's 10 degrees difference, 7 numbers of barometer, 20% better humidity. But there's also wind. Okay? Let me erase the drawings because it's getting kind of cluttered. Wind. Is the wind important? Well, let's find out. So wind is not on. What does this mean? No wind in predictions is currently checked. If I check wind changes predictions, it'll put the wind in the equation. An 8-mile-an-hour tailwind is probably something I should factor for. So I click wind changes predictions. Okay? It still missed it a little. Crew chief number 1 is really close, but these other 2 are missing it. I want it to be in the 316 range, almost 317 to run exactly right. So there's 2 things that can happen here. The factors may be wrong for the wind, or maybe these formulas that I chose were not right. So let's go back to my default DA half barrel half humidity. Okay, we're a little closer. How about DA with baro and humidity, or DA with humidity? Let me try that. That's really pretty close. So how about DA with dew point? Nope, that's off. So the DA half barrel half humidity is a little bit too fast, and the DA with baro and humidity is a little too slow. Now, if you remember, average several formulas. I'm going to do that. I'm going to pick both of these DA with baro and humidity and the DA with half baro and half humidity, and I'm going to click done. And now we're real close. Remember, the one was too fast, one's too slow. If you average both together, we're really, really close. It's not perfect, but it may just be that my factors for my tailwind factor are off. And that's controlled with the factors. We haven't got into factors completely yet, but I'm going to go into it and make an adjustment. So tailwind, I'm just 0.003. I'm just going to move the upper right just for a second and save it. And now we're getting a little closer. Actually, within probably a thou or 2 is all I'm off right now. But that's how you verify that your predictions are right. What we've done here is we've taken that run out of the database, and we are acting as it has not been made yet because we're tinkering with formulas to find the right answer, and we're really, really close. I would be perfectly happy with an 89.9 or 89.8 here. I mean, the variables of staging, as we've shown you, can have much more of an impact than a couple thou from the predictions. So the screenshots that are included in those files that you can download are very important. I think the webinar notes or something like that is one of them. You'll see screenshots at the end, and they'll have step 1, step 2, step 3, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, of exactly what we're doing here. So you can see what the answer is with the actual weather that happened during that 889.6 run is in current. Okay? The actual 60 foot is in current. So this is how we verify formulas. And I'm very close here. Could I make it actually better? Yes, I could click on crew chief number 1, and I could tinker with one of these formulas and see. First off, the DA difference is higher. So I could change this one, 0054, and save it. It didn't really make a change, nothing major. I could change the barometer to 0.2, for example. That goes the wrong way. So you can see tinkering it can have amazing effect. And all we're trying to do is get it really close, because obviously staging or wind gusts, things that we can't really tell, might be the answer. And I might tinker with a factor so much that it's really wrong, even though it answers the right question. That makes sense to you. Sometimes I'll chase what I call chase a formula, only to find out that was a fluke run. In this particular case, I know it wasn't a fluke run because I've made too many good runs that weekend and the car was really dialed. So that was with the wind on, made the difference. And that's when I come back from a run, before I enter it, I'll turn the wind on or off and see, okay, what is the answer? If I went 889.0 with 315 in the timer, and all it was wind, I turned the wind on, and there's my answer, then I feel a lot better. I'm hesitant to turn wind on in the predictions and leave it on unless I verify that both two things. Your wind sensors have a silver mark that has to point down the track. If you don't know what I mean, email me later on and I'll explain it to you. But your wind sensors have a silver mark. That silver mark must point down track towards the finish line parallel to the track. Otherwise, you're going to call me, because when you turn the wind on, your predictions are going to be in la-la land. And la-la land is a very special place to be, and I don't like to be there. So, all right, so what controls this? So now I'm done tinkering. I know I'm fairly close. I can turn the weather on in the bottom middle, which says weather is off right now. I mean, it will automatically do this when you exit this screen and come back to it. It will automatically fix this, but I'm going to turn the weather back on by clicking it twice until it comes back. And it'll start taking weather readings again and changes all its predictions and goes back to the way it was working. But I know now that that formula works pretty well. So I would be confident to go make a pass right now and say, okay, I've probably put 336 in the timer right now, or something like that, and go out and make a pass. That's my first pass. And I'd feel confident that I'm fairly close. So let's go over a couple other things, because you've been here quite some time. We're going to go over factors, how it comes up with a throttle stop ratio. So I'm going to go to calculate ratios and factors. These are the two things that guide the program. What are factors? Well, factors have two sections, small weather change factors, and this orange is large. Large weather changes will automatically come into play when they need to. You don't have to do anything. Large and small, they're different factors usually. You can start them off the same, but factors are temperature, for example. It takes 2.0977 degrees to change the car 100. Where does that number come from? Well, it comes from a lot of testing and development, and that is right here. The recommended starting base factors are right there. Okay? So if your factors aren't close to the recommended starting factors and your predictions are in la-la land, there's that special word again, then what you will have to do first before we continue much of anything, in the bottom right is reset factors. Click that button and it will put all the factors back to the factory default of where I want you to start with whatever fuel type you've told us you're using right here. Type of fuel used. Each fuel type will have different factors. So if you're running gas and you have alcohol chosen, then your factors are probably going to be screwed up. So take a look at your factors if you're running into issues. If you have good predictions, take a picture with your phone of these factors. So in case you screw it up, you can always look back at your picture and say, oh, the density altitude is 198 or whatever it is, and it's now showing 380. Now you know there's a problem. So these factors have been developed over a lot of years. Are they absolutes? Absolutely not. Are they close? Absolutely. So when you're running into problems and you're using the default factors and you have the right fuel type and you're not having a wind issue, then there's probably something going on in the car or the track or converter, whatever, that you're unaware of. So just be cognizant of what these factors do and where they are. So there's some noise. My cat is moving around and my dog is moving around, so I'm trying to calm them down. So these factors are controlled until you make a change. They're set from wherever the factory, wherever you get the program. Those are your factors until we need to make changes. So if you know that something's wrong, like if the DA is, I've got 198 feet and the default's 154, if my predictions weren't right, I'd probably click the reset factors or just type over the density altitude number to a more normal number. The bigger engine you have, the more you can have a higher DA number, higher temperature factor. If you're running on methanol or alcohol, you're going to have a high DA number and probably a lower humidity or grains of water factor. That's these numbers here, grains and vapor pressure. There's nothing wrong with tinkering with them because, again, that's what it's for. Other things here, the wind factors. We covered those a little bit because of what I did. Headwind factor, all that is a 10-mile-an-hour headwind is worth 2.5 hundredths. That's just multiply it times 10. A 10-mile-an-hour tailwind is worth 3 hundredths. Side wind is 60% of a headwind. Crosshead and cross tailwind factors are listed here. Hold on just a second. Okay, so again, when you turn the wind on, you got to be careful. And I have separate body styles for 1/8 mile and 1/4 mile. I have an 1/8 mile dragster and I have a 1/4 mile dragster in my wind factors that I normally use. So if you have an 1/8 mile race that you have to go, like those guys on the West Coast, and you're doing super comp 1/8 mile, we've done it on the East Coast a couple of times too when the weather just gets really bad. You have to have separate databases and you'll use different vehicle types. If you're going to turn the wind on, at least have the correct information in there. When I have an 1/8 mile wind factor in there, it's about half the value of these that are listed here, just so you know. Okay, I'm going to erase the drawings. Now you can ask questions whenever you want, and I will stop from time to time to do this. So these are set in stone until you tell us otherwise. And how you tell us otherwise is calculate ratios. And that's in the upper left here. You're not going to use this very often. When I see people using it every weekend, I know there's something probably wrong with their car or their setup or something. But calculate ratios is complicated because it is. It's got to be a little bit complicated because it's got to do a lot of calculating. So what is it? Well, here, let's go over what it means. I click on Calculate Ratios, and number 1, 2, and 3 are on the left-hand side. It's pretty common in crew chief. We use this kind of standardizations. Number 1 is the baseline run, the run that was on the predict screen. Number 2 area is all of the other runs. So if you just started making passes and you only have 3 runs, I get this call a lot. How come number 2 only has 2 runs in it? Because you can't analyze a run against itself. Why would you? So we take out this base run from the rest of the runs that are available for you to analyze. And how you analyze a run is really important. I pick runs that are the same weekend, same lane usually, and if my 60 foot's within 5 to 8 thou. I don't go from Las Vegas to Gainesville and start double clicking on runs because they shouldn't even be in the same database. And it really won't help you to do that. So let's say 924 is the base run, run number 1. Well, I wouldn't go to 924, for example, run number 2, because I ran damn near the same ET. And I changed the timer only 4 little numbers. So when I highlight one of these runs, let me show you what happens when you do this wrong. If you pick the wrong base run, double click on it, and it comes up with a weird number because it says in this screen, the throttle stop timer was changed by 4 hundredths, little bitty numbers. The ET changed 4 hundredths. That means my throttle stop ratio is less than 1 to 1. No, it's not right. So you would always select no. You don't want it to update that because there's no reason to. Hell, I was damn near perfect on both runs. I don't need it to do this because it can't do a throttle stop ratio. Why can't it? Because there's more to the story than what we're seeing here. And what is the rest of the story, you say? Well, between 1 and 2 are some check boxes. These check boxes are the rest of the story. Compare no wind ETs. If it's windy, I don't normally do calculate ratios, but 8 mile an hour versus 4, I might want to. I can adjust for 60 foot. If their 60 foot is outside the realm that I normally would do. So my 60 foot's the base run 147, 146.6. It's within the realm of what I should be looking at. But 4 little numbers in the throttle stop is not a ratio test, in my opinion. But just for giggles, we'll check compare no wind ETs. When I do that, it gets a little bit better ratio, but still not what I would expect. I'm going to adjust for 60 foot. And now it's a 140 to 1 ratio. Again, not accurate. So I don't update the factors or anything like that because there's no reason to. You should not be selecting runs that are that close in ET and that close in throttle stop. It's got nothing to do. You've got to have where you want 885 and then added 10 or 15 numbers. Then you can do a throttle stop ratio test. If you just change the number 1 number and it changes 5 thou, you don't need to be in here. There's 2 things that this screen will do. It'll calculate throttle stop ratios right here, and it will calculate weather ratios, which are right below it. And then you can update the factors that control the predictions. I'm not going to use that right now because the car is too good. I know it's right, and I can look at all these, and they're only little bitty changes. One was 4 numbers, one was 5 numbers, and one was exactly the same. So when I double click on one that's exactly the same, throttle stop number, for example, it can't do a throttle stop ratio test. All it can do is come up with the weather calculations. So the weather calculations are only if there's a spread in weather. So when you're picking runs in here, you're not picking runs that there's 29 feet difference in DA. And how do I know that? Is because in the middle of the bottom area, it tells me there's DA difference of only 29 feet. None of that will help us. I need a spread of from 900 to 12, somewhere around 500 feet difference. So if it goes from 1700 to 900, maybe. But it's not the same weekend. Well, we can still try it and see what happens. So I'm going to uncheck analyzed ones, and I'm going to go down here to one that's got a pretty big difference. And this one comes up with a fairly good answer. And I'm going to erase the drawing so it and I'm going to bring your attention to what it's telling me. The throttle stop timer was changed 25 numbers. That's a pretty good change. The ET changed 0.0123 when they analyzed everything. That works out to a throttle stop ratio of 2.018 to 1, or 0.0202 rounded. In this particular case, I still would not select yes, because I'm too close. It's coming up with 202 to 1, and I'm already at 220, which isn't a huge difference. I don't think that's going to be the difference. But you don't say yes to any of this unless you've got a reason for it. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So I'm going to say no to this. But down here, it's telling me there's 1,273 feet difference in DA, which is a pretty good swing, 840 feet of adjusted. So those might be interesting if it were the same racetrack, and it's not. So I'm not going to update the large factors that control it. If it's the same weekend and I go out there and go 885, then I put 20 numbers in it, and it goes 897, for example. Then I might do that. But don't use this screen all the time. I will use it every 6 months, maybe. And I'm going to use it the first time out this coming weekend if I miss the second hit. I don't really care the first one. I care about the second one. So that's what this will do if it's used properly. So in order for us to come up with a better answer, perhaps I should pick a different baseline run and let it do its work. But I want to make sure you understand that this screen can get you into a lot of trouble if you use it the wrong way. And too many people use it the wrong way. You don't analyze every single run. You only analyze a swing of 10 numbers or higher and the 60 foot within 8 thou, and then, usually unless there's a big wind variance, then that screen will answer a lot of questions for prediction logic. And it will do it all automatically, and it's actually relatively quick and pretty precise. But if your predictions are good, like I went 890 with a 4, 889 6, 890 with a 7, 888 4 when I was trying to go 888, 890 with a 5 all out, don't go into there and change anything. All you'll do is screw stuff up. If you go 885 and pogo stick to an 895, then back to an 887 and then an 892, then yeah, we want you to go into that and let it recalculate your throttle stop ratio. If you pogo stick high and low, that's the first indicator that your throttle stop ratio here on the run entry is wrong. It's too high. And it's the same thing as under the prediction screen and under the factors tab. The throttle stop ratios, you can override yourself if you don't have enough runs to do it. If you're pogo sticking, drop your throttle stop ratio. If you're at 3 to 1, 0.03, maybe you need to be 0.02. We can let crew chief do that, but if all you got is one run or you're changing stuff all the time, you got to let it work before you do anything else. I'd like to see if anybody has any questions before I continue. If you don't, I know you've been here a long time, and I appreciate it. Let me see how many people are here. All right, we had 200 and now we're at 124. So a lot of people probably had to go to sleep. And I apologize it goes so late, but there's a lot to cover here. And there's no way to make it any real faster. I'm sorry to say. But so what I'm going to do a search all runs. I'm going to go down and find where I was really fast and really slow. And see if there's maybe one I can do. There's a lot of 890s. 886, 1. Let's actually, I'm going to do a search on Gainesville. Search by track. And I'm going to type Gainesville. Just type G. It jumps right to Gainesville. And I want to bring your attention to something that happened a few years ago that might be a perfect indicator of what this is. Where was it? Okay, yeah, here's a really good indicator. We can use these. Okay, so I'm going to go back a few years. Here's a run from Gainesville from 2018. Okay, my first pass out. I had a new torque converter. It was basically the same, but it was a little different. Obviously, it had been freshened, but it somehow was different. Let me tell you how this works, and I'll show you how Crew Chief comes to line here. My first pass was an 899 and 181 miles an hour. Not a very good pass. Okay. I had 365 in the throttle stop, kind of just throwing a number at it. Needed 342, it said, to run the number. Great. The very next pass, using Crew Chief, I was 000 on the tree, 890 with the 3. Number 1 qualifier, wonderful. And the predictions were really, really close of what it said. At the last second, I changed what it was saying. Crew Chief number 1 was telling me 342.5. And I rounded it up to 343 because my teammates were a little bit fast. And I go 890 with a 3. The Crew Chief number 1 was perfect. I mean, it would have been 8900 with a 000 light. The very next run was first round of eliminations. I was 000 dead on with a 4. I had 332 in the timer, and this time I went a little bit quicker because I saw too many people go 91s and 92s. I made a slight adjustment to what the prediction was saying, and it worked out real well. So I was on a tear. So let's go back and let Crew Chief do this throttle stop ratio. I go back to predict, calculate ratios, and now I'm going to go find that 889 or 899 or 890 run, excuse me. I'm in La La Land here. Again, there it should be, and I double click on it, and then I'm going to uncheck this wind and 60 foot. It's 2 to 1. Let's see. So here it changed it only 4 little numbers. Why was that? Oh, because of the fact that one was slow and one was fast. Let me just try this other one just a minute. Nope, that's the wrong one. That was from different. I'm in La La Land again. Sorry about that. Hold on, let me unanalyze that. I picked the wrong run to analyze. I picked one from the year previous with a different engine. So that was 3.9 run number 1. I'm looking for 3.9 run number 2. Here it is. So when I click this, and hopefully people are still paying attention, it brings me a warning sign that says, don't screw this up. And it's telling me I changed the timer by 22 numbers right there. It's the ET came up to plus or minus 5 thou from perfect. And because of that, it will not allow me to update the throttle stop ratio. It's going to leave it at 230 to 1. No other changes are necessary. Factors and ratios appear to be correct. And all you can do is click OK. And what that tells me is the prediction was right. If it had been wrong, then it would have told me a new throttle stop ratio. And I would have believed it because going from 899 to 890, if I had the wrong ratio, it would pop up and tell me a very good answer. And the reason I know that is because, well, I've been there. So, and I can double click on another one, and now I'm analyzing 2 runs, the 2 890 passes in a row. And this one is saying that I'm 240 to 1. And then this one's saying 220. The average is 230, which it's already at 230 to 1. So it doesn't need to make any changes. And I really won't change anything else because 2 runs in a row have been damn near perfect. I don't need to change anything. But I want to show you what happens when it's right. When it won't allow you to update factors, it grays out these buttons because we don't want you screwing it up. And that's how it's supposed to work. It will try to prevent you from screwing itself up. So if anybody has any questions, I can stop here for a minute and I'll let you do that. Hopefully I've covered some things that you want covered. I hope I have at least. And I hope that these changes are something that you can use in racing. Let me see if there's anything else I would like to cover. But try that one where you right-click on the base run and go through that. It's pretty cool. Be careful of wind. Okay, traction meter we already went over. Pick runs. Okay. Well, I've covered way more, but I want to make sure that I haven't left anybody behind. If you do have a question, leave me. People are saying thank you because they're having to leave. So thank you for coming by. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm really trying to make crew chief where people win. And that's my goal is, unless you're racing me, I want you to do well. Even if you're racing me, honestly, I wouldn't mind. I don't mind you do well. I mean, there's like a couple of races here that I'll just pull up. This last race at St. Louis, I was 15, 889.3 against Rick Hughes, number 33, who's a really good racer. I lost to the final round. He's 001 on the tree and goes 91. He's a customer also. He had locked me out. Best I could do is tie him. But it's interesting, and then, I helped these people and they beat me. Okay, and then what we want to cover is the team on button. Mike wants to know about that. Let me show you what that is. A team license is an option in crew chief software. What that is, on the predict screen, I'm going to do this. Team on allows you up to 5 cars predicting at once, and that's controlled with this team users menu at the very top middle of the screen. I'm going to put an arrow to. It's an option, but when you click the team on, watch what happens here. I have this preset for a couple of my teammates, but what it does is it turns into a multiple prediction. So Larry's right here, LB is his designation, Larry Bernhausen, and mine. So I can switch between predictions. I'm going to pull up one more. That's his predictions. Here's my predictions, for example. I'm going to exit. Let me actually make something a little bit better here. I'm going to go to team users, and I'm going to check the team people. Here's where you set them up. You've got 2-digit initials and the people's names, LB, DB, and there's a junior car in there. And I just want to make sure something was set up here. So I'm going to go to team users, and I'm going to go to the third one and set that baseline run. Now when I turn the team on, I should have 3. So I've got DB here, that's my predictions. There's Larry's and my other car. So 3 cars at once. And now on the pager, it's sending one line says DH for Don Higgins. The next line down, and it has all the predictions in a line. The next line down says LB, and it lists all Larry's. And the third line down says DB, and it lists all my predictions. Every 2 minutes, it updates your pagers and or your text messaging option if you have that. And we'll tell you every 2 minutes the new predictions and the weather for all the cars. And you can do up to 5 at once. So if you have buddies that it only works on one car, or excuse me, one weather station, one computer is all that it's allowed to be on. But you can do up to 5 cars. You know, if you have 3 super comp cars, 2 super gas cars, whatever, you can do all 5 at once. And to put those runs in, Crew Chief just requires that you don't use the same run number for the same day. The run date and run number have to be unique if you have multiple cars. There's a video under the help menu that covers this. If you click on the help menu, if you bought the training videos, if you bought the team license, you'll get one of these videos. But if I click on help, go to watch instructional videos, here's all the videos. And the team license video is in the bottom left, how to use it. If you click it, a video will start playing that covers the team license and all of the features and how it's used. So there's an option, you pay for it once and that's it. And then you can do whatever you want. And now there's times I'll put my car in twice. I'll turn the wind on one of the cars and the wind off on the other one. It allows you to do that. In the team license area, you can have one that has the wind on and one with the wind off. And it's kind of cool to be able to do that, to enter your car twice, one with wind on, one with wind off. And I'll do that at places like Joliet when it was open, Las Vegas, places like that there's a big wind change. And so one prediction might be showing 336, the other one might be showing 326. One has the wind on, one has the wind off. And so when I get ready to run, if I see everybody going 400 or 500 slow, I'm going to use the one with the wind on and live with it. And it can be amazingly accurate. But that's what the team license is for. Thanks for coming by. Yes, Bill, I appreciate you coming by. Darren, thanks. Are there any other questions? Usually we get a lot of questions, but I've covered a lot of stuff. Again, you can get this training video downloadable tomorrow or the next day. It takes about 8 hours for it to finish processing and takes quite a bit of time to put it up on the website. But you'll be able to get to it and watch it whenever you want. Download it, watch it whenever you want. Well, I don't want to hold everybody up. We've been here quite some time. If you have questions, feel free to either type them in or email them to me. But if you have something you want me to cover now that you think will help everybody else, then let me know. Make sure you download those files, though. They should be on your screen, something that you can download, click on, and I think it will really help you. Do I need Wi-Fi for the time slip simulator? No, only the first time you use it do you need Wi-Fi. And then after, it's $79 a year, I think. And then the next year, when it's due, you'll have to have Wi-Fi for the first time you use it after you update it. But no, once you get it, activation code for it, and you're online the first time, you don't need it for a whole year. And I highly recommend Time Slip Simulator. It's a really cool product. It comes from Australia, but we facilitate the order. So if you want to get it, just contact us and we'll get you where you can download it, get you an activation code, and make it all work. Again, well, I appreciate everybody coming by. If you have no other questions, I'm going to sit here for another minute or two. And if you do have questions, go ahead and type them in. I'm going to go to the weather graphs and see how my new weather station here is. Hold on, let me go here to 9. A lot of people don't realize you can do this, but you can pull up the weather graphs and see all the weather for the entire day every minute of the day. And I do this because I'm testing weather stations right now before they get shipped out to customers. And you can see graphs about it. Mike wants to know, yeah, there's a fee of $10 for this. You can just buy it online if you haven't already. And you will get both the basics webinar we had last week. You'll get the ET prediction webinar and this webinar, all for one fee of $10. But if you go to crewchiefpro.com, click on buy online, about halfway down on the left-hand side, it says webinar. You click on it, it's $10. Measly amount of money, honestly, for what you get. Let me see what this is. This is kind of cool here. Yeah, I'm glad, Mike. It's I try to pass on as much knowledge as I can. Here's a graph of the test of the weather station while I've been talking. Every time the heat or the air conditioning comes on, you can see the temperature jump up and down, the density altitude moving, adjusted altitudes, grains of water and all that moving. Fascinating. I test every weather station, though, before it goes out to customers. So. Thanks, Russell. Appreciate you coming by. I hope you learned something. And this view report button on the weather graphs allows you to see every minute of the day, every reading it's taken. Thanks, Peter, for coming by. Russell, I appreciate it. And I just double check that everything looks legitimate before I ship it. Most weather stations we have, before we sell them to you guys, we'll test them for 4 hours. So, now what do we have there? Let's see. That is humidity. So view report 947. $54. Is that the drop? Nope. Ah, there it is. I got no weather data. So that is 28945 exit. Well, I'm going to shut it down now. I thank everybody for coming by. You're welcome, Mike.